Welcome to the Clothed in Glory campaign, where we hold gender justice conversations. This is one of 7 episodes that are available on YouTube. You can find the rest of the videos in our playlist under Clothed in Glory.
Thank you. Welcome so much. I'm so glad that you're here. My name is Paola Fuentes Glycorn, and I'm the Immigration and Women and Girls Campaign Manager for Sojourners. I want to say 2 things as we get this call started. For those of you who need a live transcript, we do have that option available. And the other thing that I want to talk about as we begin this conversation together is a trigger warning. We will be talking about sexual assault, sexual violence. As we know, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, so that will be one of the big themes of our conversation today. And we acknowledge that this content may be difficult, and so I want to strongly encourage you to take care of your safety, of your well-being as we're having this conversation. And the text that we'll be looking at is the story of Tamar in the Bible. So that's found in 2 Samuel 13, verses 1 through 38.
In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had an advisor named Jonadab, son of Shemaiah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, "Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." "Go to bed and pretend to be ill," Jonadab said. "When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, "I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight so I may eat from her hand." David sent word to Tamar at the palace, "Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him." So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat. "Send everyone out of here," Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food here into my bedroom so I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, "Come to bed with me, my sister." "No, my brother," she said to him, "don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing." "What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you." But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than her, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." "No," she said to him, "sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you have already done to me." But he refused to listen to her. He called to his personal servant and said, "Get this woman out of my sight and bolt the door after her." So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing an ornate robe, for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornate robe she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has that Amnon, your brother, been with you?" "Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." And Amnon lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. When King David heard all of this, he was furious, and Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. This is the word of the Lord.
I guess it's a driving force for me to create these initiatives, for me to create these efforts really that drive people towards realizing and championing their own stories of power, their own stories of transformation, right? And echoing that into something beautiful that we continuously create or co-create together.
Thank you for the work that you do in that empowerment and especially as we connect this to clothing ourselves in glory as part of reclaiming our bodies and our stories. So we talked about the story of Tamar in our breakout rooms. What connections do you see between your story and the story of Tamar, and what learnings do you draw from those verses?
So it was very interesting in my team, actually, where we were looking at two fords of that story. But just when I am thinking about the story, right, off the top of my mind, and seeing the similarities or connections that are there with my own story, you know, I see that there is sexual violence in Tamar's story that was happening by her own brother. So within my own story, I have survived sexual violence within our home and with neighbors and people that I didn't know, you know. So that's like one part that connects for me. And then how, you know, some of this sexual violence is actually influenced by people around. And for Amnon, it was influenced by his friend, you know, who advised that he should actually pretend to get to the bed with Tamar. And for me, the sexual violence that happened in my home, it was actually my brother-in-law that was influencing my other brother-in-law to actually just get his way with me as I was sleeping on that bed. So I see those connections. I see the connection in how she just tore off her ornamented robe, you know, because this had happened to her. And in my own story, I remember just how I felt so out of my own body. I felt like I needed to change my skin. I needed to rip it off or just wash it off, you know. I just wanted to wash off everything that had happened. For her, she was turning the robe off, and she was applying ash to herself. But I remember how I sat on the cold floor in our shower, you know, and trying to wash as hard as I could, that I was only ripping my skin off my body, but not taking away what had happened, not even changing it in any way. Now, something that was interesting in my team was the perspective of the ash and the toning of clothes and how the symbolic part of it for when sin has occurred in the olden times of the Bible. And I was thinking about how that actually connects with my own story as well, to how, you know, this sexual violence has been perpetrated against me by someone else, yet I project that I have caused this person to sin. It is my body. It is what I was doing that has led him to sin, and therefore I am a sinner myself, when actually I am not the sinner. The sinner is somebody else that needs that mind transformation. So I see the reactions from within my own family, right? When they were learning that all these assaults had occurred to me. And part of the reaction for my mom was that I should keep it quiet. We should not wash our dirty linen in public. You know, I should take heart and just find strength in myself. And when you see, it's part of how Absalom had actually reacted in Tamar's story. And fast forward that, you know, he was there now avenging what had happened. And I was just really curious, and very intrigued when I was seeing that in my own story and seeing how, part of my own trauma has been shared within the family. And them asking me to maybe keep quiet at the time was not really to harm me, but it was because they couldn't handle what had happened even within themselves. But at the time when it happened, I didn't see any of that. I just saw that they didn't support me. In the sexual violence that happened within our household, I expected my sister to react differently to that, as opposed to it looking like she was supporting the perpetrators in our own house. I felt very unsafe living in that household. So I kind of see, a lot of connections in Tamar's story with my own, only that some parts look a lot different in our times.
Yeah, so I'm sorry for all of those very difficult experiences, and yeah, unfortunately, those responses are quite common at times for survivors. So how do you wish that your community, your family had responded? What would a good response have looked like for you?
To be honest, I wish that my family didn't ask me to keep quiet, or they remaining silent about it. I honestly wish that we talked about it, because talking about it would have helped me process it, and certain traumatic, like post-traumatic results or things that I had later decided to respond to as a result of that trauma would not have been, what I would have experienced, because we would have been talking about it, would have been sharing ways and sharing some of that heavy trauma with my immediate family within our house, and therefore it would have brought me in better places. But because I was carrying all this trauma on my own, it resulted to me wanting to fight for justice on my own. I really wanted to go to school after the last assault had happened. I really just wanted to go to school, and there was no funds at home. There was no money for me to do that. So I opted to actually using my body, because this was a tool that men wanted to use for their own good, and they would not pay me for it. So how about if I used it, and I got paid for it and sponsored my own school, and later, got in a position where I could fight for my rights. I could fight for my own justice. And so I ended up deciding to put my body up for sale to men, So if my family didn't remain quiet, if they processed it with me, I would have felt supported. I would have felt heard. We need to talk about some of these things. And when I was young, I wish they didn't blame me for some of the things that happened, because they blamed me for coming home late. Yet this man that had been stalking me, had delayed me to come back home from the errand that I was sent on. So I wish they listened and not keep quiet about it, but rather brought me to a place where I was helped and assisted. It's the same thing, really. When I tried to find solace within my church and shared what was happening in my own life with the pastor, I would have loved for his response to not be very judgmental to, what were you wearing? Did you scream when that happened? I wish it wasn't limited to that. I wish it was broader than that. He literally just judged me and put me in a position where I had sinned, and therefore God was out to get me. So I wish my church, or my pastor from my church, had responded differently at the time when he knew. And therefore, my call really to parents and the church, because those played a really big role in my own story, is that parents should really take some time to build that connection with their children. In Africa and in Zambia and in my household, relationships with your family are far-fetched. Relationships with your mother especially is far-fetched. And there are things that you can't talk about it, and sex is one of those. I can't just go to my mom, even now that I'm older, and sit down and we're talking about sex or my experience with sex or my views about it. It's not something that I can talk about it. Culturally, it is very wrong. It's going to cause it's an eyebrow-raising circumstance. So you can't even go there. So my wish is that parents hold those conversations over a few bonding activities that they can do with their families. And I know that those in our different countries look differently. In Africa, in our whole house, those would look like just basically washing dishes together outside and having these conversations to listen to the hearts of your child. And when they are young, to teach them how they could defend themselves and the power that they hold. Because whether male or female, we are not powerless, right? We have so much power. We have so much strength that we can give and that we have within ourselves to defend ourselves and to stand up for others. And the church, I know that the Bible has taught us about love, it has taught us about mercy and about grace. And we in the body of Christ are not the judgment of humanity. You know, yes, the Bible has taught us how that would look like, but it's not us that are the judges. It's clear on who is going to be the judge. So it is very important for the church to not protect perpetrators, because perpetrators need mind reformation. And when survivors come in the open, it is not to judge them. So we need to, I'm calling the church, you know, to, in my own story and in the stories of other survivors, to kind of come in the forefront to empower, you know, survivors to shine as opposed to victim blaming. What were you wearing? Did you scream? Did you tell somebody immediately it happened? Because survivors sometimes will not tell anybody about it because they are still processing it themselves. They can't still fathom what had happened. And for Tamar, her reaction was screaming out in the open. But for another survivor, it would be to be quiet about it and then process and come in front to want to talk about it. So that would be how I would have loved the church and my family to respond to it. However, I got a lot of support from my friends. One of my friends was a survivor before I became a survivor myself. So when I shared my story of how hard the process was, she really supported me. Of course, it wasn't, you know, like everything that I would have wanted. And some of it was wrong because we decided to just drink alcohol and cry our eyes out because this had happened. Some of it was wrong, but she was there. You know, she was there to listen. She was there to listen to what I was processing at the time, and I was able to listen to her. So, yeah.
Yes, and that just reminds us of the importance of being those people for each other, right? Of being supportive and listening and responding well, and what a difference that can make. Thank you for sharing that. And I hope that we all heed that call that you're doing to parents, to family members, to churches about how we can actually respond in supportive ways that center and empower survivors. So the other question that I wanted to ask is, as we have this campaign of clothing glory, how have you used fashion and clothing to reclaim that gloriousness of your body? You know, we talked about that with Tamar's story that she rips that, but how have you used fashion as a way of healing and reclaiming that gloriousness?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, after all the abuses that I had survived, I could tell you that my sense of fashion had like really been changed. It had been impacted, and I would call it negative impact, because I was constantly asked what I was wearing. I was constantly what I was wearing was constantly referred to as the reason it had happened to me, right? And the second time, is it the second time or third time, sorry, that it happened to me, I was literally wearing what we call modesty here in my country, in Zambia, you know, a long skirt, a top that covers, you know, what I call hallelujah chests now, or parts rather, and it happened, you know, it still happened. I went for an interview seeking a job, and that happened. I can't change what it had happened. So I kind of wanted to cover up like every bit of my skin. I wanted to be in pants because I thought they were safer, and they would take long for someone to rip them off and have their way, you know. But when I started processing my own story, I began to learn about my identity, right? I began to draw or come into who I am a little bit better and more and more. And when this started happening, I knew that sexual violence or abuse, right, can never be projected on clothing. It's not the clothing. It's not even the survivor's fault. So when I started coming into that, I started creating, a new behavior around how I viewed what I wore and how I showed up in spaces. And that gave me a sense of power, a sense of liberation to be and to dress up the way I would want. And part of that, in our culture in Zambia, when you are of age, right, you need to wear a chitenge wrapper when you're around men and the fathers as a sign of respect, but also because you just need to cover up. So I stopped wearing my chitenge on my waist and I started wearing it on my head as a symbol of a crown of beauty in all of my brokenness. And what I love about chitenges, which is one of the things that I'm wearing, so in most of the interviews, I show up like this, right? I love that these wrappers come in different styles, okay? And each of those styles is symbolic of something. And so today, as I showed up, the red is symbolic of my virginity, which I had lost when I was 13. The black is symbolic of my own color. And the white is symbolic of all the things, all the possible light that I could wear and shine in the world, And so all this representation of that beauty, of that power, and of that hope is what I want to show up as in the spaces that I am in. So as much as chitenge is respect, and now sometimes I wear it on my waist, sometimes I make clothes with it because it's fun. You can do so many things with it. It's not limited to just one thing. Respect the men. Don't show them the meat. Because whether you show them the skin or you do not, right? It's what they're processing in their head, and they'll still react based on how they want to react.
Wow, that was beautiful. I love that. I love that you use it as a crown of beauty, and that it represents different things, different colors, and you can wear different ones. I love those practices that you've implemented. Do you have any other personal, cultural, or spiritual practices that you do to honor your body?
Personally, this year, I am choosing to be reborn in my body, in my mind and in my soul. So what I do is kind of just reflect every morning on how have I woken up, get in touch with my body. And in the evening, reflect again and go back to how I am feeling. Was I reborn in my own story? Because again, my journey of survivorship has not changed. My healing has not wiped it all out. I get triggers in my work as I work with other survivors, but I continuously choose to be reborn, in those spaces. So self-affirmation and listening and introspection are some of those practices that I do for myself. And spiritually, I love God. And so meditation and devotion are a thing that ground me. I found a huge grounding in meditation and in worship. So I sing, not that I'm a singer, but I use my voice to just ground myself as a practice. Culturally, I love the culture of Zambia where we dance. So women dance with their waist. And again, we use the chitenge to just put on that wrapper around our waist and we dance. So again, in our cultures, the dance, when you become of age, they teach you, how to be a good wife by dancing for your man and all these cultural practices that you need to do, right? So for me now, as I come into my own power and into the liberation of my own story of brokenness, right? I just want to use some of those cultural dances to express and channel out some of that anger that I might be feeling on that particular day.
Yes, thank you. Those are great. I know that I come from Latin America, and dancing is a huge practice for me as well, of self-expression, of de-stressing, of all of these things too. I wanted to really thank you for sharing your story with us, for sharing your wonderful insights, for sharing part of your journey toward healing, toward empowerment, toward reclaiming your beauty, your gloriousness. It is such a powerful story. If people want to learn more about the work of Freely in Hope that Elena works for, I'll put their website on the chat. So feel free to go and check it out. I know they have a book coming in the summer around how to, it's called Pindo's Power. And it's really about teaching child and parents how to prevent child sexual abuse. So feel free to check them out. In the last couple of minutes, I did want to share with you all, there is an article that was written by somebody else who also is connected with Freely in Hope. And it talks about different ways that churches can help survivors of domestic violence, but there is also things you can do for survivors of sexual violence, sexual assault. So please feel free to check that out. Feel free to invite others to join the campaign, to join these conversations, to join in taking these actions together with you to create a more just world where men, women, all people are given equal opportunity, respect, protection in society, in our church, and in the world at large.
Thanks for watching one of the 7 episodes of Clothed in Glory. And don't forget to subscribe to support SojoAction's work and see more content like this.